So now the material's all set up. We've got the colours and the highlights and the reflections working. We're going to work on the rest of the animation. So the goal for this animation was to have these clones sort of draw the text out, draw the MoGraph text word, and then we're going to have these clones inflate and sort of blow apart. So we're going to do this with a plane effector, which is going to scale up the clones. And the other thing we have to do is we have to turn off this follow position, which is holding the clones onto the text. So let's start off with the plane effector. So I'm going to select my cloner and go to the MoGraph menu and create a plane effector. Now this plane effector is just going to adjust the scale. So I'm going to turn off position, I'm going to turn on scale, I'm going to turn on uniform scale so that they don't stretch in any odd directions but stay uniformly scaled. And I'm going to take a guess and say I want them to, let's maybe go up by a factor of 2. Okay, so what we have to do, because this is dynamics, we won't see these settings update in the window here. We have to actually play it through from the start. So let's rewind and hit play. I'm expecting my clones to be ginormous, which is great. Now they're not going to start like this, they'll start small, so we can use the plane effector to have these clones turned off to start with, and then, well, the scale turned off, and then the plane effector will turn the scale on. The other thing I've noticed is that my clones are really starting to go pretty slowly in the viewport. I've got quite a lot of them. There's a lot of collisions going on, so things are getting a little slow. One thing you can do with your clones, if you go to your cloner, go into its object settings, if all of your clone objects are just really simple duplicated objects that aren't doing anything unique, you can change this instance mode to render instance or to multi-instance, and this is actually a way of improving the memory usage in the computer, and it hopefully might speed a few things up as you go along. This is still looking a little slow. I'm just going to change mine to render instance. Just as it starts to draw these all on, it's definitely getting a little slow. I'll leave it on render instance. As I said, all these do is they can potentially speed up and use your memory a little more efficiently. Okay, so the scale is definitely working, so let's get a field working with our effector that we can run through this to turn that effect on. So I've got my plane effector selected. I'm going to go to the fall off tab, and I'm just going to create a linear field. Now here's my linear field. It can be a little bit hard to see, but it is in there. Now I've made my my text along the x-axis, so I want this linear field to run along the x-axis. So if we go to its field tab, it's going in the x-axis, which is fine. Now I want my field to start somewhere over here. Let's just make sure I've got just that field selected. Let's try that again. There we go. Now as you can see, some things are happening in the screen as I move my field around, but it's not updating accurately. So we need to ignore this just until we've set the keyframes, then we can play through. So what I want to happen is for let's just turn that field off for a second, the plane effector off. What I want is for my text to write on, and once it's finished writing on, which is around about 75 frames, I want it to hold for maybe a frame or two, and then about here, about frame 120, let's say, it's going to expand and start to fall apart. So here's my plane effector. Let's turn these back on. It's over here. There's my field. So I'm going to go to frame 120. And I'm going to move my plane effector. I'm just going to turn off my physical sky. It's making my plane effector a little hard to see, so let's just turn off the physical sky. That makes it easier. And here's my plane effector. It's going to start here, so I'm at frame 120. My plane effector is off to one side of my clones, and I'm going to hit the keyframe button. So I'm keyframing it there, and I want it to take about a second to pass through my clones. So let's go 1 second forward, which is 25 frames. So frame 145. I'm going to grab my field and drag it past. And as I said before, we're getting an update, but it's not accurate. Let's take that a little bit further. I'm going to keyframe it again. So now I've got 2 keyframes here as my field moves through the clones. So let's go back to the start and rewind and play that so we can see what happens. So okay, so my clones are really big here, and shortly my plane effector should go through. and it's shrinking them. So my plane effector is back to front. They're supposed to start small so we can read the word and then expand. So rather than sort of rotate this around or change the keyframes, all I need to do is go to my linear field that I've got here. I can go to the remapping tab on my field and I can just invert the function of this field. So that means rather than scaling these up, rather than scaling them down, it'll scale them up. So let's rewind and play again. So now we've got small clones, and this should inflate them as we go along once it starts moving, which is now, and there we go, they all blow up. That's great. And as they all expand, they're all pushing the other particles out, the other clones out the way, and it's getting really dynamic and exciting looking. So the only other thing we have to do now is turn off this follow function that we set up originally, so that as this field passes through, this follow position switches off and the clones fly off all over the place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a guess and say about halfway through the field going through my motex, somewhere about here, I want to animate this turning off. So let's stay about frame 130. Now you can play around with these settings. Feel free to experiment and put in whatever times and values you want for these. But I'm going to say it's about halfway through. And what I'm going to do now, one thing we did earlier on, if you remember, is we set up the Espresso tab, which means that our cubes that are stuck to the motext, they will, their follow position will do exactly what the sphere's follow position will do. There's the expression, the set driver, set driven expression using the Espresso tab. These are linked together. So all we need to do is animate this follow position on the sphere. So about frame 130, I want to have that on full, so it's at 8, the follow position set at 8, and then over about, let's say, I don't know, 10 frames. Let's make this happen reasonably quickly. Let's set that down to 0 and keyframe it. So as that field is passing through, that follow position turns off. So let's rewind and hit play. There's the particles drawing on. There should be a slight pause once they're finished. Here it comes. Now comes the field, and yep, they're all falling apart now as that follow position is turned off. So that's great. That's all working really well. So now that this is all working, I'm pretty happy with that. Now, again, if you want to go through, change your settings, but I'm happy with that. Because I've got a lot of dynamic clones here, there's a lot of collisions and interactions, my scene's moving very slowly. So from now on, to be able to put a camera in here and render this, what I want to do is cache the dynamics here or record them so that my scene is much faster to scrub through and to play back. So I can select any one of my dynamics tags, doesn't matter which one it is. I can go to the cache setting and I can bake all the dynamics in the scene. So this will take a few seconds to go through and create that calculation and record the position and rotation of all those individual clones. And once that's done, we should be able to then scrub through our animation backwards and forwards because it's all baked and it's simulated and recorded. So that's nearly finished. There we go. So now if I scrub through, there's my clones, and I can slow down a little bit here, and there goes them inflating and blowing apart and then settling. And I can scrub it backwards if I want to. So that's looking really good. That's fantastic. So all I need to do now is put a camera in there and get ready to animate the scene. So what I'll do is scrub forward until I can see MoGraph written out. Now what I'm going to do is position my view roughly in the right place. Don't want to go through the ground there. And let's create a camera right here. So create camera, just a plain camera. And remember, Cinema 4D creates a camera where you are looking in your perspective view. So if I just tumble out the way now, there's that camera that I've just created. Let's make it a slightly wider angle camera. And let's look through it. And maybe just get a little bit closer. And the good thing now that we've got these dynamics cached is I can just scrub through the timeline really quickly. I can see what the camera is going to see. And this is nice. I like the way that some of these elements are coming right into the foreground. So that's looking really good. We're ready to render that now.